5 subtle ways people test your boundaries and how to respond. That is what I'm talking about in this video, mate. I used to be a people pleaser, I used to be a nice guy, I used to be too nice, I used to have no backbone, and I used to let people walk all over me. I used to have no idea what boundaries were, and as a result, I didn't have any. And one thing I want to tell you, one thing I want to communicate with you today, is that when you go from being a people pleaser to being a man with self-respect, with the assertiveness to back it up and set boundaries, that will not go smoothly. But today I wanted just to give you a very practical list of things to expect and ways that people test your boundaries, and I want to give you a simple way to respond in that situation, because many of you guys, as was the case with me, didn't actually know how to respond. Because usually if we respond in the way that we've been programmed to respond, then we would respond in a very passive way, in a very nice, pleasing and overly agreeable way. So without further ado, let's dive straight into it. So the first way, the subtle way that people will test your boundaries is they will pry for personal or private information. So one thing a nice guy or a people pleaser often says to me is, I'm an open book, which basically means he has no boundaries with what he shares with people. Now, this may be authentic to you. Maybe you actually don't mind sharing pretty much everything. But I question that. I invite you to question that. There'll be some things that you don't want to share. Some things you want to keep to yourself, which is perfectly fine, and it's very self-respecting to have limits on what you share with people. However, you may have people around you in your circle who won't respect that. They will start prying for personal information. They'll start guilt tripping you. They will start asking for information about your relationships, asking for information about your finances or whatever. Maybe you've not experienced this, but it comes up often enough that I'm going to mention it today. But how do you respond? Well, you can respond. Again, you don't need to be overly aggressive, but one thing you can say is just say, I prefer to keep that private. I'm not comfortable sharing that right now. Okay, you can reaffirm your boundary by just saying, I'm not comfortable sharing that. I'd rather keep that private. It doesn't have to be complicated, but you do have to stand firm with it. So the second way that people subtly test your boundaries is by consistently showing up late. Now, people showing up late by 5-10 minutes might not seem like a big deal. You might have some friends that are a little tardy, they don't show up on time for stuff, but it might be the case that you're noticing that most people in your life, or a disproportionate number of people in your life, show up late for stuff. Chronic lateness, what it can mean is that this is it can signal a lack of respect for your time. It can signal a lack of respect for your boundaries, subtly suggesting, they might even be subtly suggesting with their lateness that their schedule, their time, their priorities come before yours. Whereas in a healthy dynamic between two people, it's reciprocated. It's based on mutual respect for each other's time. But then when someone consistently shows up late for your stuff, they're prioritizing themselves over you, and they're assuming that you're not gonna say anything about it. They're assuming you're just gonna take it. You're not gonna say anything. There's gonna be no consequence for it. So what do you do in that situation? You give them a polite reminder. Okay. The polite reminder is for first time or occasional lateness. You might say, "I appreciate it when we're able to start on time. Let's try and keep that going. I appreciate it when you're on time. Let's try and keep that going." The third thing that you might notice. The third way people might test your boundaries is with subtle guilt tripping. And when someone uses guilt tripping, they're essentially testing how much emotional leverage they have over you. They might say something, when you start setting a boundary or you communicate something you're not happy with, they might say something like, after all I've done for you. After all I've done for you. Do you remember, are you really going to drop this on me now? After how far we've come together and all this other stuff? Really? How can you say this to me now, after what I did for you last week or whatever? This is subtly implying that you're somehow responsible for their emotions or their situations. It's them trying to gain a form of leverage over you, using guilt with that as a manipulation tactic. Now, nice guys and people pleasers, because of our internalized toxic shame, we have this deep belief that we're broken in some way and thus have to make amends for our existence. We are often susceptible to guilt tripping. And guilt trippers and manipulators will use this against us because they know we're susceptible to it, because they know it works. So what do you do when someone's guilt tripping you? First of all, you refuse to cave. Okay? You refuse to be guilt tripped. You can say something like, I understand that you're disappointed, but this is what I need for myself right now. Use empathy, right? You can be empathic. You can say, I understand that's disappointing, but this is what I need to do, okay? Simple like that. Again, doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be long-winded, doesn't have to be overly confrontational, but it's just reasserting that this is what I need, I understand you're upset, and this is what I need all the same. Number 4 is dropping subtle jokes or subtle criticisms at your expense, especially when you're around people, okay? Especially when you're around in like a group setting. This comes up quite often. This is like a subtle test whether you'll speak up or you'll let it slide. And it kind of shows them how far that they can push you before you'll do anything about it. Now in this situation, a lot of men often say to me, I'm just being sensitive, I'm just being over the top, I'm just getting upset over nothing. And a lot of the time, this is just a rationalization that a nice guy will use to avoid confrontation because he's afraid of confrontation, right? And in a way, when he's getting subtly disrespected or someone's making a joke at his expense, and he's feeling upset about it, every time he says, no, I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, you know, I'm getting upset for no reason. He's basically saying that his needs and feelings don't matter, okay? Again, it's a form of toxic shame. He's basically believing, he's undermining his own self-respect by saying that his feelings don't matter, everyone else's feelings matter more than mine, okay? So if someone's making subtle jokes and jabs at you, and you feel disrespected, you feel upset by that, perfectly fine. I want you to acknowledge it first and foremost. Don't try and avoid it. And I want you to address it by just simply saying, that comment felt disrespectful. That felt disrespectful. I didn't like what you just said. Okay, just speak up for God's sake. I didn't like that. Oftentimes you'll notice when you just simply say, I didn't like that. That was a bit too far. That felt disrespectful. I didn't like it when you said that. Simply saying that sometimes, what you might notice is the other person kind of just says, oh shit, sorry, or whatever. Because that straightforward response, it signals that you notice their behavior and you will not tolerate disrespect. And the fifth way that people subtly test your boundaries and what to do about it is ignoring your no. If you said no to something, if they're asking you for a favor, they're asking you for money, they're even asking you to come out on a night out or something and you've said no, they might subtly ignore that. By keep being persistent and ignoring your no. They might downplay your no, or they might be overly guilt-tripping, which is something that I mentioned earlier. What you do essentially when you've said no is you stand by it, okay? You stand by it, you say, I already said no, and that hasn't changed. I already said no, and that hasn't changed. Treat that no as a complete sentence, because the truth is you don't owe anyone any further explanation. That's just internalized guilt speaking. That's your toxic shame telling you that you need to apologize for your existence. And just by saying no to somebody and disappointing somebody, a part of you might feel like you have to then soften the blow. No, you don't. Get used to saying no. Get used to realizing that your no is final, and pressuring you, other people pressuring you, will not work. Assertiveness, standing up for yourself, sticking up for yourself, is one of the things I work with men on in my 12-week Pleaser to Leader program. If you're interested in, over the course of 90 days, becoming a strong, assertive, capable, self-respecting, confident, and unapologetic leader of your own life in your relationships as well, then click the link in the pinned comment down below, read the page, see if it suits you, apply for it, book a free call with me where we're going to discuss it, and then we'll see where we go from there. All right? Take care, brother, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.